everybody! My name is Kelly. I am here with Alix Harrow, author of The 10,000 Doors of January, a book that I loved and many of us at Mysterious Galaxy loved. We're a genre bookstore in San Diego, so we do a lot of mystery, sci-fi, fantasy, but fantasy books are kind of where our hearts are. And so a book about fantasy and magical worlds and different worlds, and a book about books and writing and storytelling it just hit us straight to the heart. So it is my pleasure to be here with Alix today. How today is going to work is we have a chat. You can see the chat, but we also have Ask a Question. So if any of you have any questions at any point, you can just go ahead and click that Ask a Question button as opposed to the chat. And I will be able to see your question and I can ask Alix for you. We're going to kick things off with Alix talking a little bit about the book and then doing a reading. And then we'll do kind of a Q&A, and then we have a special sneak peek of something that she's working on, which I'm very excited about. So Alix, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is one of those things where it's like, you know, I know it's a pandemic and it's awful, but I would also never get to go to your old bookstore, and this is like as close as I can get. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. So do you want to tell readers if they haven't gotten the chance, because we're actually celebrating the paperback release of this book. Came out today. So we're actually offering, you're going to sign book plates for anybody who buys the book through Mysterious Galaxy. And if you haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, please do so. It's so good. Do you want to explain a little bit about the book?
So you would think like it's been out since September. I should be like better at this question than I am. But my brain always freezes and I'm like, there's a girl and she finds a door and that's it. Which is essentially the pitch. The other pitch I use is post-colonial Narnia. And that's pretty much like if you really liked those portal fantasies when you were a kid, like the 19th century Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan kind of a stuff, but you don't necessarily love the class, gender, race, and imperial politics associated with them. This is like, I went to grad school, got sad, and wrote my feelings into a book. So that's basically it.
I love that. Yeah, very much. You can tell the inspirations from kind of that earlier, the first kind of portal fantasies of the early 20th century, and it's redone for kind of the modern world and what everybody sort of can relate to now, as opposed to back then when it just wasn't actually being written about, which is really cool. Do you want to kick things off with a reading?
Sure. It's going to be not super long and boringly from the very beginning. So I'm sorry if this is familiar to people, but like I wrote the first 5 pages of this book was like the first part of it I ever wrote, and it didn't really change. And I'm so grateful to it for that it's kind of my favorite.
Awesome.
And I'm also going to share my screen so that instead of looking at my face while I read, you'll look at some very beautiful fan art. So hold on a second. Where did it go? Hold on. I might have messed it up. I might have confused it. Hold on, everybody. Sorry.
The joys of technology.
Well, when you test things, it turns out you slightly change them. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yep, I can. Looks like you're screen sharing, yeah?
All right. Okay, so chapter 1, The Blue Door. When I was 7, I found a door. I suspect I should capitalize that word so you understand I'm not talking about your garden or common variety door that leads reliably to a white-tiled kitchen or a bedroom closet. When I was 7, I found a door. There, look how tall and proud the word stands on the page now, the belly of that D like a black archway leading into white nothing. When you see that word, I imagine a little prickle of familiarity makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. You don't know a thing about me. You can't see me sitting at this yellowwood desk, the salt-sweet breeze rifling these pages like a reader looking for her bookmark. You can't see the scars that twist and knot across my skin. You don't even know my name. It's January Scaller, so now I suppose you do know a little something about me, and I've ruined my point. But you know what it means when you see the word door. Maybe you've seen one for yourself, standing half ajar and rotted in an old church, or oiled and shining in a brick wall. Maybe, if you're one of those fanciful persons who find their feet running toward unexpected places, you've even walked through one and found yourself in a very unexpected place indeed. Or maybe you've never so much as glimpsed a door in your life. There aren't as many of them as there used to be. But you still know about doors, don't you? Because there are 10,000 stories about 10,000 doors, and we know them as well as we know our names. They lead to Fairy, to Valhalla, Atlantis and Lemuria, heaven and hell, to all the directions a compass could never take you, to elsewhere. My father, who is a true scholar and not just a young lady with an ink pen and a series of things she has to say, puts it much better. If we address stories as archaeological sites and dust through their layers with meticulous care, we find at some level there is always a doorway, a dividing point between here and there, us and them, mundane and magical. It is at these moments, when the doors open, when things flow between the worlds, that stories happen. He never capitalized doors, but perhaps scholars don't capitalize words just because of the shapes they make on the page. It was the summer of 1901, although the arrangement of 4 numbers on a page didn't mean much to me then. I think of it now as a swaggering, full of itself sort of year, shining with the gold-plated promises of a new century. It had shed all the mess and fuss of the 19th century, all those wars and revolutions and uncertainties, all those imperial growing pains. And now there was nothing but peace and prosperity wherever one looked. Mr. J.P. Morgan had recently become the richest man in the entire history of the world. Queen Victoria had finally expired and left her vast empire to her kingly-looking son. Those unruly boxers had been subdued in China, and Cuba had been tucked neatly beneath America's civilized wing. Reason and rationality reigned supreme, and there was no room for magic or mystery. There was no room, it turned out, for little girls who wandered off the edge of the map and told the truth about the mad, impossible things they found there. I found it on the raggedy western edge of Kentucky, right where the state dips its toe into the Mississippi. It's not the kind of place you'd expect to find anything mysterious or even mildly interesting. It's flat and scrubby-looking, populated by flat, scrubby-looking people. The sun hangs twice as hot and 3 times as bright as it does in the rest of the country, even at the very end of August, and everything feels damp and sticky, like the soap scum left on your skin when you're the last one to use the bath. But doors, like murder suspects and cheap mysteries, are often where you least expect them. Okay, I think that's it.
Yay! I'm so glad you did read from the beginning, because I remember getting your book. I was lucky enough to get an advanced copy from the publishers. Thank you, Orbit. But we get lots of books that come in and out of the bookstore, and I opened 10,000 Doors and I read that exactly what you just read out loud, and my heart just exploded. I love that writing. So thank you for doing that reading. I think that worked perfectly.
And I should say that illustration was Ari Frascatore, who is an illustrator who's on Twitter, and she just did it out of the goodness of her wonderful heart. So you should definitely follow her. She's been illustrating a lot of different books, like doing little fan art pieces. I think she just did the Winter Night trilogy, and they're beautiful.
That's awesome. What was her Twitter handle again?
Ari Frascatore. Let me try and type it into the chat so that people can see it.
That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Perfect. Everyone, go follow her. Cool. Well, we'll take it to some questions. We already have a handful of them. And let's see what we got. We have a very basic but important one. What is your favorite book?
No, that's not a basic question. I refuse that question. That question is trouble. Oh my gosh. Right now, I'm going to say Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but that could change within moments. That's one of my favorite books. When it first came out, I was finishing college, I think, and was looking for I'd kind of stopped reading fantasy because I was pretentious and I was trying to be serious.
Yeah.
And I was like looking for something that would draw me back in. And I read that while I was like a senior in history, studying like Victorian Empire. And I was like, this is it. They wrote it for me. Like, this is for me.
Oh yeah, and all the footnotes, I can tell that you're a footnote gal. It makes sense. It's a gorgeous novel. I'm so excited. She has a new book coming out in this fall, September, I want to say.
I've read it.
Did you like it?
I did. It's profoundly different. And I think if you go in hoping for like a sequel or something, you'll be sad. But it's weird, and it has that sense of like magic being just profoundly strange and kind of alluring and always on the edges of things. It has that feeling to it.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so excited. Yeah, Jonathan Strange and Mr. No is so good. And yeah, that is definitely likely to change. I have favorite books, just depending on where I am in life. Okay, next question. What gave you the idea of traveling through doors?
My mom was an English major, so I grew up on like the classic English children's lit. So your Peter Pan, your Alice in Wonderland, Narnia, anything, and also like that mid-century kind of American stuff. Anything where there was like a group of siblings who found a magic thing in the attic. Like I read all that. And I think when you grow up in rural Kentucky and you're kind of an oddball kid from an oddball family, it's pretty natural to be like hopeful about that idea of doors, you know, to just like kind of always be waiting to find your door in your closet.
Checking the back of the wardrobe was like a thing I did my whole life.
I mean, I wasn't like 100% sure what a wardrobe was, because that's not a Kentucky thing to have. Like we just have closets. But I was like, if I find one, definitely I'm going to check.
Always.
Yeah. So of course, like as soon as I started writing, like all of that childhood longing comes back out, and you're like, but what if there really had been one in that? Because I grew up on a farm in Western Kentucky, so that field is very much like from my memory.
Yeah.
But what if?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is they're actual doors in 10,000 Doors of January. And I think in a lot of that like fiction that you were just talking about, the children's literature, it's sort of like a stand-in door. It's not an actual door handle. You know, it's through the rabbit hole, or it's whisking away to Neverland, or through the wardrobe, or in the Narnia series as a whole, it's always through something else. You know, the magic rings that they get in Magician's Nephew. And with your book, it's actual doors, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and you'll notice that I literally never explain that.
No, it's great.
I love that about my own book.
It's great.
Well, it's like I don't know, there's doors there.
No, it's wonderful. And it's like what you just read, like the capital D door. I mean, that you make that idea and you actually, it's like you're almost like reversing. It's like not a metaphor anymore. It's what's real. It's like taking that magical metaphor and actually putting it upright in center and saying, this is what's happening, which I like.
Isn't that just the coolest thing about fantasy, though, is that you get to take feelings and emotions that are mostly metaphorical, and you get to make them literal. I love watching that process. Like in realist fiction, which I do read and like a lot, you get to talk about the longing for escapism or wistfulness or not fitting in your own world. But when you get into fantasy, you get to actually go explore other worlds. You know, you get to literalize these internal things. And I think that's so cool.
Yep. And all the worlds within worlds and magic within magic. It is really great. Okay. We have another question. If you could walk through a door right now, what kind of world would it lead to?
Ooh, I mean, right at this moment, almost any other kind of world.
A door to the world.
Just whatever. I'm going in blind. My traditional answer has always been Lyra's Oxford from the Golden Compass books, because it's always seemed like this platonic ideal of academia that I never actually found. Like I went to grad school and I liked academia a lot, but I always kind of wanted it to be like Oxford and have all these like towers and old libraries and reading rooms and secret clubs and probably some murder mysteries. Like I would like to go to that world. It seems cozy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I get that. All right. What are the best and worst writing tips for you personally?
Yeah, I'm not a huge believer in writing advice. Partly because like I've written a second book now, and I was much more, I had deadlines and I was much more aware of my process, and it revealed to me how little of a process I have. Like I just sit down every day and sort of sweat, and then like at the end of a year, you have something that's like a book. And that's not a very advisable thing to do. But the only thing that has been important to me essentially is to not get too like precious about it. To like remember that it's work and not get too like up in my feelings about being like doing fancy art. Because that helps me not like, I don't need a certain playlist. I don't need coffee. I don't need it to be a certain time of day. I have 2 small children. I have a 1 and 3-year-old. So you gotta write when you can. And I try to like not be like, this isn't like the kind of fancy art that I need to be in like my room overlooking the sea. Like I need to be able to do this in a parking lot on my phone. So that's been important to me.
Like getting what you can done in the time that you have and making time where you might not think you have it, that sort of stuff. A lot of authors, like I'll hear them say that it's just doing it, just writing it. Like read books and then keep writing till you have something finished.
That's the whole secret. I mean, there's a lot of writing advice books that have a lot of smart things to say, but I do feel like in the end, it's like read and then write and then try it. And sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not. And that's pretty much the beginning and end of it.
Yeah, I like that. All right, let's see. We still have questions coming in. One question, I've seen your book classified as young adult. Was that your intended audience? If not, do you think having a teenage protagonist automatically classifies it as young adult? What are your feelings on that?
I have so many feelings. I think this is a good question. Because so when I was writing this, it did not occur to me that I had written a young adult novel until like I was writing my first query letter, and I was like, wait, she's 17. This is a coming of age story. Oh no. Which I read and enjoy a lot of young adults, so it wasn't that alarming. But it got acquired by Orbit pretty quickly and strangely, and they don't publish young adults, so I didn't have to worry about that ever again, which is fantastic. And I think they did intentionally market it at sort of that crossover audience where like, if you like young adult, you might like this. And it's not, there's no like R-rated scenes. There's no reason a teenager couldn't read this. So in that sense, I don't feel like particularly hung up about how it's categorized or what shelf it's on in a bookstore or something like that. I do think in a broader sense, there does seem to be a tendency to categorize fantasy by women particularly, and I would say maybe especially women of color, as young adult in a way that is, it makes me skeptical. I have questions about it. And in particular, I think it's partly the authors and it's also partly the protagonists. Like, I think we see young male stories as sort of a universal and important story. And when we see young females, we seem to think that that's a specialized like interest group or something, that can't be a stand-in for the universal experience. So like Catcher in the Rye is rarely categorized as young adult, but that is a high school boy. That's a young adult story, arguably. And I just think that we tend to categorize women's stories differently.
Yep, I agree. That's a good answer. Do you ever write fantasy stories set in other worlds, or do you prefer magical versions of our own world? If the latter, why?
I have tried, I think, exactly one secondary world fantasy where like I just invented a whole world, myself, and I find it just hugely intimidating. I don't know why. I think I like the illusion that I can research our world and come to some sort of objective reality. I will say with the second book, I strayed a lot further from history because everything in the 10,000 Doors, like if you look up those footnotes, which there's no reason for you to do, it's almost always referencing specific places and people and books even that did exist. And I spent a really, in retrospect, absurd amount of time doing all of that. And in this next book, It's a much more thoroughly alternate history. So it's like a world where witches once existed and then they were all burned and there's no more. And so that 19th century looks a lot different. And I let myself not worry so much about like, well, when exactly did the Pullman strike happen? And was it who would have been involved in Chicago? And what were the train schedules like? I was just like, calm down. I get to just reference these things and build a little bit more of my own world. And that was pretty freeing. So I'm kind of excited about it.
There's lots more freedom in kind of an alternate history that you're kind of reshaping within our world, as opposed to, you know, trying to write the Silmarillion from the get-go and create a whole new world.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. All right. I like this one. What is your favorite writing or reading snack?
This is weird, so brace yourselves. Saltines dipped in applesauce. It's my jam.
Oh, tastes like jam. But applesauce, but not jam. Just applesauce is the jam.
Sometimes jelly, yes. Basically, okay. I just eat like a lot of saltines a week. I don't have a good explanation for it. But that was like what's weird is that was like my mom's special treat back when we were in like rural Kentucky, was she would have Vienna sausages and saltines. And I have done away with the Vienna sausages because, you know, they're death in a can. But I kept the saltines.
The saltines, like that, like hand to mouth of just like keeping busy while you're typing, like, and they don't like sit heavy in your stomach at all. Like you just kind of just eat a million of them, a whole pack. Okay, let's see. I like this one. What book or books turned you into a reader or writer? Have you always known that you wanted to write?
So I think I knew I wanted to write until about age 16, when, as I said, I got pretentious and cool and thought I wanted to be like a historian and an academic and leave fantasy behind. But before that, you know, I was always writing fantasy stories. I think in middle school, my little like voted most likely to be was voted most likely to be an author, because I was always harassing my poor social studies teacher. Shout out to her. Yeah, so I always did want to be a writer. And the books that formed me, I mean, I've mentioned my mom's history with writing. She was also a huge nerd. So I got the Earthsea books really early. I did The Hobbit. I did children's fantasy, a lot of E. Nesbit, like The Five Children in It, and I think The Enchanted Castle or something like that. Yeah. I'm trying to think, what was the first book that I read and I was just like, I want to do that. And nothing's, I mean, honestly, probably Harry Potter. Like, I was always the exact right age to read the Harry Potter books. Like, I was Harry's age growing up. So those were completely targeted at me. They were made for me. So, yeah, it was probably those.
Were there any authors in particular that you just admired and just thought, like, one day?
Yeah, I mean, I read a ton of Tamora Pierce. Like a ton. All of those books again and again and again and again. Anything that had a girl with a sword in that like young adult 90s fantasy market, I read that and loved it.
Robin McKinley, have you ever read any of her books?
Oh my God. Oh my God. I still reread Robin McKinley's books all the time. All the time. In particular, The Blue Sword. I know there's a lot of Hero and the Crown people in this world, but The Blue Sword, that's where it's at.
Looks so good. I love that. All right, let's see if we have any more questions. I know you talked a little bit like this, but this one question says, hey, Alix, what inspired you to reinterpret stories like Narnia with a focus on colonialism?
Grad school. So I started taking history classes kind of at random as an undergrad, and the first one that really just grabbed me was 19th century imperialism. It was kind of a global comparative study of different empires, and it just felt like, you know, I mean, I was pretty young in college because I went to college early at 15. And so that's like a moment when you're really trying to understand the world. And particularly I was trying to understand like the power structures of the world. Like how did we get here? And why does the world look the way it does? And it just felt like looking at empire, particularly in the end of the 19th century, was looking at the roots of the global power dynamic that we have now. And so I just got kind of obsessed. And I went to grad school and got my master's, and I wrote my thesis on the representation of empire in British children's literature. So obviously I got to read all my children's books again. That was a scam, but it was, you know, like looking at representations of race and environment and class and like who these protagonists were. It caused me to kind of revisit a lot of my childhood classics and see that like Narnia, for an obvious example, is not just like a escapist fantasy, it is also a colonial fantasy. So it's four little white children who go into a foreign land that only has animals for natives, which is pretty rough if you think about it, and then they end up on the throne. And everybody's happy and it's great. And that in some ways is a children's version of how they imagined the British Empire. And so once I kind of faced that, it felt like my childhood fantasies were coming in conflict with my like adult knowledge. And I guess that was like a tangle I wanted to look at.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you for answering that. Let's see. A little bit more about your writing background. Will you ever have a full book of short stories? I know that you've written a few short stories, and then this is your debut novel, correct? Okay. Any short story collections in the works?
I mean, no, but that's not really a thing authors get to choose unless I self-published. Like, I mean, hit me up, people. But and I don't have that many short stories yet. I average an amazing publishing record of like 1 or 2 a year, so it's going to be a while. But I did start writing short stories in like 2014 or something like that, and it was pretty explicitly in my mind practice to try and write a novel because I hadn't written anything since middle school.
Yeah. Do you have any of your short stories available anywhere if someone wanted to get like a look into what your short stories are like?
Yeah, they're actually all free. I think all of them are free online. I have links up on my site, but like the most recent one came out in Uncanny magazine, The Sycamore and the Sybil. It's all Googleable if you Google my name.
That's great. Okay, let's see. Going down the list. There's a little bit of a long question. Let me see if I can ask this. This might bleed into a little bit of the question you just answered, but it's a very interesting one. Reading 10,000 Doors of January while stuck at home was such a welcome escape, and it particularly resonated since escaping via books is the theme of this book. This book was very much the right book at the right time for me. What book for you has resonated not just once, but again, once you've gained a different perspective or lens on life?
Oh, I love this question because I have an answer for it. The book Tehanu, which is like the 4th book, I think, in the Earthsea cycle, Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea cycle. And if you read the Earthsea cycle, it's a trilogy that's like kind of a classic epic fantasy arc. You know, you got young heroes, they save the world a couple times, it's all great. And then Tehanu is this weird follow-up that the first time I read it was absolutely not the right book at the right time because it follows a much older woman, and it's like almost like her reflective memory of her life and her ideas about heroism, and it's the previous hero of the trilogy, Ged, who's old and has lost his power now. And I was like, this isn't an adventure. What is this about? I'm not into this when I was a kid. And then when I reread it after having kids, it felt so much more like it was Le Guin's reckoning with like masculine ideals of heroism and what heroism and power could look like in traditionally feminine roles. And it was so much more interesting to me and so much more compelling. And I intend to reread it, like, you know, add it to my annual reread list.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I read the first Wizard of Red Sea a long time ago and never continued on. So I actually did not know that the fourth one was kind of a whole shift away from the narrative in
So
that way.
different.
That's
It's
so
so
interesting.
different.
I've got to read that. I always make this joke, like I don't know if you watch Gilmore Girls, but when you watch it as a teenager, you're like, yeah, Rory, you're like, come on, like you're so on the side of Rory. And then I did a major like rewatch of it a couple of years ago, and I'm 31 now, and so I'm just like identify so much more with Lorelai, and I'm like, Rory, stop making your mom, come on.
There's also the shift where you watch it as a teenager and you're like, these guys are great. And then you
Mhm.
watch it when you're like a 30-year-old borderline socialist and you're like, eat the rich. So,
Yeah,
you know.
bring them all down. Yeah, totally. Let's see. Huge congrats, this comes from someone. Huge congrats on the Hugo nomination. And besides winning the award, good luck, good luck. Are there any other major writing career milestones that you'd love to hit?
Oh, honestly, I've tried to keep those like pretty reasonable and limited because it's just a thing that's pretty out of my control. So one of my early ones was that I wanted somebody to do that thing. I don't know if you've seen it on Instagram or Twitter, where people like paint their fingernails to match your book cover. I had seen that happen for authors. I was like, that's so cool. And that happened like before the book came out, I think. So I was
Aw,
just like, well, I don't know what to aim for now. I guess this is it.
that's it. It's your peak.
I peaked now. Fan art was like a huge one, and that's been pretty amazing. Yeah, I guess the big goal, though, and I think this is true for almost every writer that I know, the dream is to get to keep doing it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's would be amazing.
Yeah. Well, you're certainly on your way there. Let's see. What was the publishing process like for you? Was it easy or hard? Did it take a long time or short time?
So when I signed with my agent, she was like, "Don't tell this story at writers' events because they'll all hate you." Which is fair. This is kind of a
Yeah.
garbage story, and I'm really sorry. But I had a short story come out, A Witch's Guide to Escape in Apex magazine, and it went around Twitter a little bit. And an agent and an editor at Orbit DM'd me, and they were like, "Hey, you don't happen to have like a novel, do you?" And I was like, I was like, "Give me like 3 days to finish revising it." And I revised it and I sent it to them and I signed with the agent and the editor made an offer, and that was it.
It's amazing. That is,
That's very annoying. People spend a lot of time and work querying and finding the right agent, the right editor. So this is just dumb luck, and I'm very grateful for it.
no, but
And
I
it
mean,
landed with an editor.
yeah.
Nivea Evans at Orbit is who acquired it, and her editing made it much, much better. And she was the perfect fit for it. So it really was phenomenal.
That's wonderful. That's like kismet. That's great. Okay. Have you used your stay-at-home time to reread any of your favorites? And if so, what were they?
So I'm assuming that means like quarantine time.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's two profoundly different experiences of quarantine. Like there's people
Yeah.
who have a lot more time than they did before, and there's people who have a 1 and 3-year-old who have significantly less time.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So I haven't been doing that much rereading. I have fallen into romance novels for the first time in my life, and I don't know what I've been doing with my life. They're fantastic. It's great. I'm having the time of my life. And I recently hit this fantasy romance series by T. Kingfisher. I don't know if you've read those. Sword Heart is the one I started with, and they're great. They're sarcastic. There's banter. It's wonderful. It's
So
the most restful thing.
where would be a good if someone was going to go into romance and hadn't before? Like, what was the book that got you like there?
Yeah, that's me. I had never touched romance before, and I asked Twitter, which is always a little bit dangerous, and they recommended Courtney Milan's Brothers Sinister series, which is
Okay.
like, I think Regency. I don't know. I wasn't even paying attention. Historical romance.
Yeah.
And they were just an absolute delight. The Countess Conspiracy, I think. I didn't realize that romance novels were feminist now. That's fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm telling you that I truly had not touched the genre because I was a fool and a snob. So I'm really like educating myself here. But the Countess Conspiracy is like a woman scientist who her love interest is the man who's been publishing her work under his name to cover for her this whole time.
Oh my
And
God.
it's amazing. I had so much fun.
That is so cool. I love that. Well, what is going to be your next reread? Like for me, I had been wanting to reread Howl's Moving Castle, one of my favorite books, for like years. And it took once I did sit down and read it, like with the stay at home, I was like, well, this is it. This is time. Like I need something to make me feel good. I want to read this book. And it took like, a few days. But that was like my like one, like, I'm going to reread this book. Like, what's your next, like, itching to reread it?
Oh, I have recently gotten to interview Lois McMaster Bujold,
Oh, wow.
who is one of my absolute oldest and most beloved reread authors in the world. So I'm probably like just cosmically about to hit the Vorkosigan Saga again. If you don't know, they're a huge sprawling series of space opera novels that are nothing like the other sci-fi novels I read as a teenager. Like they're just extremely about characters. There's so much humor to them and so much warmth and a lot of family dynamics. And I love them.
That's great. Yeah, there's a lot of those books.
Yeah, there's so many, but they have terrible 80s covers. I'm sorry, I'm typing the name into the...
It's like a typical like space fantasy cover.
Oh, and some of them are like shiny paperbacks. They're so bad.
Still, they're still published like that.
Yeah. They're just like so insightful and human. And like the very first one, I think Cordelia's Honor is the omnibus version, and it's about like a mother living through the experience of like typical space opera hijinks, like war and revolution and whatever. And it's so much a different perspective on that. I think it came out in like 1986. It's actually like, it's not that surprising that I latched onto it.
I have not read those books. And now I'm thinking that I should.
I mean, they're funny. They're genuinely funny. I really recommend them.
Oh, that's so great. Let's see. We probably have time for a couple more questions. This one's good. Did you always know how this book would end, or did you try out some alternate possibilities? I know that might be a little bit difficult to ask without spoiling things, but I'm sure you could do it.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't think that I can write things without knowing where I'm headed. Like I'm a pretty serious outliner. So I always had that final scene in my head. I knew where everybody was going. But the thing about who specifically January was writing to this whole time, I didn't realize that until the second draft, which is embarrassing. I was like, oh, of course.
So no alternative sort of endings, or did you play around with a different one? No, always new.
And I just tend to be that way. Like I usually have like a first scene that doesn't change and a last scene that barely changes.
Yeah.
Like, and everything in there is just raw meat that I go over like 50 million times. But the beginning and the end, I'm pretty sure about, it seems like.
Yeah, that makes sense. Here's another question. What book or other form of story have you discovered through your kids and fallen in love with?
Oh my gosh, I love picture books now. I read so many picture books a day, like an exhausting number of picture books a day. And recently we've just fallen in love with Mo Willems' Elephant and Piggy books. I don't know if
Yes.
anybody knows them, but they're so funny and cute. They're great. And there's not that many words per page, so it doesn't take a million years to read,
Yeah.
which I personally really appreciate at this time.
Have you done it came out a couple years ago, Not Quite Narwhal yet?
Yes, yes, we
That was
have.
really good.
We also have the series of wordless picture books. Oh my gosh, what is the guy's name? It's Journey, Quest, and Return.
Aaron Becker.
Aaron Becker, that's it. Yeah, and they're
Those are gorgeous. Yeah.
so beautiful. And our 3-year-old is the kind of 3-year-old who's been obsessed with like knights and adventure and stuff since forever. So he just like narrates the whole thing to himself, and there are these wonderful adventures. And is there a girl who finds a magic door and goes to another world? Yes, there is. I have a type. I don't know.
It's okay, guys. Don't worry about it. Those are really gorgeous books, though. I'm glad you mentioned them. Let's see. Trying to find one. Oh, we'll do, okay, I have my next few picked out, and then we'll switch things up. What was the most difficult aspect of writing The 10,000 Doors of January?
I love them very much, but definitely my kids. So I got halfway through the first draft, and then my first kid was born. And I stopped writing for a little while, and it was difficult for a while to see like how that was ever going to work again, because I was working full time and I had an infant, but my husband stayed home with him and was his full-time caregiver, and I like made it work. Usually 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. was my shift for writing the second half of that book.
Wow.
And when you have a kid who doesn't sleep very much, that was difficult. That was definitely the hardest part.
I could definitely see that being the case. Wow. Okay, so the last two questions kind of go hand in hand, and they also kind of delve into the next part of this event. So one question is, what can you tell us about your next book? And the second question, book from someone else, is how did the writing experience of your next book, which is called The Once and Future Witches, differ from writing The 10,000 Doors?
Okay, so the next book, yes, is The Once and Future Witches, which my editor ever sees this. It took an email chain. I think it got over like 80 email exchanges before we came up with the title that we liked. And so the pitch for that is suffragettes, but witches, which is pretty succinct, and I think gets at the heart of what we're doing here. But it is the American women's suffragist movement in like the 1890s, but it's a very alternate version of American history, except the idea is that they are fighting not just for the right to vote, but kind of to regain the lost magic of women. Wow, this is the first time I've pitched it. This is exciting. I
love it.
And the process was hugely different. The process of writing was hugely different because I had a contract and I had a deadline and I had people to disappoint or satisfy, and I had help, and it was just super, super different. The thing that was the same is that the very beginning of drafting the second book, my second child was born. And so I was really right back in that 4 to 6 a.m. zone that I knew so well. That part was the same, except I also had a 2-year-old then. So it wasn't the easiest writing process. I kind of have high hopes for book 3 that the kids will just be a little older and that we could have babysitters and childcare and stuff. But then, of course, the quarantine hit. So, we'll see.
Life. But your experience, like your life experience points are just like off the charts now. So, book 3, nothing.
I got up at 4 this morning. I'm back to it. I know what this is about. And so anyway, for a variety of reasons, partly due to my own anxieties about writing and my own failure to trust the story, and I was so nervous about my deadlines, I turned in a book And I got my edit notes back, and I ended up rewriting the entire thing from top to from
Wow.
beginning to end.
Oh my gosh.
And it was totally the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I know intellectually that like the first draft wasn't wasted.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of work.
Yeah. A whole rewrite is definitely. How long did it take you to do that?
I don't know. I think like 2 or 3 months, somewhere in there. It's kind of a haze, to be honest.
Time has no meaning anymore.
People do that all the time. Like there are wonderful, talented writers who regularly turn out books in 3 months. But I am not those writers. I am slow.
Yeah.
So I don't know how they do it.
I think there's so many authors that stop by the store, and they're all over the map. There are some people who really like can write books in a month, but they're pretty few and far between. But then we're talking about Susanna Clark, and she wrote Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and it's been 15, not 15. It's been at least a decade.
A while. Yeah.
Since that came out, and she has her second novel. And Erin Morgenstern just wrote Alix E that came out last year, and that before that it was 2012. And Circe too, Madeline Miller, 6 years in between her books. So everybody is different, and I think all of the people I talk to in and out of the bookstore are very willing to wait 2 weeks if it takes 2 weeks, or or if it takes years for the book that like is not just for them, but is the author's heart and their hard work and like what they actually wanted to give to the world. So everyone's different. Well, we are about at like the 10 minutes to 8 o'clock mark here in Pacific time. Do you want to give a little bit of a sneak peek of whatever you can for your next book that we just were talking about?
I would love to. It's going to be very short, but what I thought we could do. So I did this very silly thing where I drew tarot cards of my own characters, partly as a reward to myself for finishing the rewrite. So the first 3 chapters are introducing the 3 main characters, and the viewpoint rotates between them through the whole book, and they're 3 sisters. So I thought I would do the little paragraph introduction of each person and do that little share my screen thing again if I can get it to work.
Oh yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, is that working? Can you see it?
Yep. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, so this is from the first chapter. Once upon a time, there were 3 witches. James Juniper Eastwood was the youngest, with hair as ragged and black as crow feathers. She was the wildest of the 3, the canny one, the feral one, the one with torn skirts and scraped knees and a green glitter in her eyes, like summer light through leaves. She knew where the whippoorwills nested and the foxes denned. She could find her way home at midnight on the new moon. But on the spring equinox of 1893, James Juniper is lost. Okay, so that's her introduction. This is the next sister. Agnes Amaranth Eastwood was the middle sister, with hair as shining and black as a hawk's eye. She was the strongest of the 3, the unflinching one, the steady one, the one that knew how to work and keep working, tireless as the tide. But on the spring equinox of 1893, she is weak. And here's the last sister, the beginning of the 3rd chapter here. Beatrice Belladonna Eastwood was the oldest sister, with hair like owl feathers, soft and dark, streaked with early gray. She was the wisest of the 3, the quiet one, the listening one, the one who knew the feel of a book's spine in her palm and the weight of words in the air. But on the spring equinox of 1893, she is a fool. Okay, so that's my 3 people.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That is such a treat. Well, I think we'll wrap this up for today. Just a huge, huge thank you for coming on and sharing your works with us and sharing your process. Like I said, 10,000 Doors of January is just a staff favorite at Mysterious Galaxy. We loved it as soon as it came out, as soon as it was in our hands. And we loved putting it in other people's hands. So this is actually, so today's the release date for the paperback copy. So no excuses, gotta get it.
Which does have the first, I think, couple chapters of the Once and Future Witches in the back.
I didn't know that. That's so cool. So yeah, so if you buy your copy from Mysterious Galaxy, you will get a signed bookplate from Alix. You have until 1 week from today. Today is the 12th. And a week from now, I can do math, is the 19th. So you have until the 19th to purchase a copy. Just order online. We're currently closed like for in-store, but we're processing online orders like crazy. So if you order online and then in the comment field, just say that you want a book plate and if you want it personalized or not, just let us know and we'll get that to you. And Once in Future Witches comes out in October, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great, awesome. So hopefully we can see you again for that as well. But thank you everyone for coming and thank you, Alix. This was such a delight.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.